This is Invisible Inc., the podcast for under-resourced women entrepreneurs. And I'm your host, Shubha Chakravarti, founder of Achieve. Join me as I talk to women entrepreneurs about the nuts and bolts of their journeys and to experts who will give you insights that are hard to find anywhere else. Let's jump in. How do you create a viable business by scratching your own itch? Can you really build a tech business as a non-technical founder? And in a world made noisy with disruptive unicorns, how do you buck the trend and manage your business for profitability and longevity rather than explosive short-term growth? In this episode, repeat founder and tech entrepreneur Melissa Kwan talks about how she capitalized on her long-standing frustration to start eWebinar, how she orchestrated its development with smart resourcing and an eye on revenue and cash flow from day one, and how she used her authentic definition of success to shape every aspect of her business. Now, here's Melissa. Hi, Melissa. Welcome to Invisible Inc. We're very excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
So you've had a pretty interesting journey. Talk to us a little bit about when and how did you decide to become an entrepreneur and what triggered the move into entrepreneurship?
So I became an entrepreneur for real, like quit my job and focused on it for real 12 years ago. The last job that I left was at SAP. That was the biggest company I've ever worked for. Previous to that, I worked for smaller companies here and there, but always in sales and business development positions. I think I was always entrepreneurial, but I was never an entrepreneur. So I'm not from a family of founders or business owners. My mom didn't have a job. My dad worked in the same company for 40 years. And so I was always envious of my friends who had entrepreneurial parents and they would do things with them, whether we were in high school or university, but I never got the chance to do that. And so I was always curious about what that meant. Always try things on the side, but never fully dedicated because I think I was just too young. And so when I quit SAP, I think I was like 27 or 28, something like that. I decided that was the time to try something on my own. And that was my first foray into my first company. And now I'm on to my third.
And was there like a pivotal moment that made you say, now is the time?
I just really, really hated working for someone else. I think I hated it more at SAP because it was such a big company and I didn't realize what it meant to be in a big company. I think there's something to be said when people say like, you can't hire people who've only worked in corporate in a startup and vice versa, because the things that you value are just so different. And what I didn't realize working for small, medium-sized companies was I was still allowed to be my own person. So I was still able to be creative and have different roles within my own role. And I didn't realize that that was something that I liked until I went into SAP and you have very, very distinct responsibilities and you can't do anything outside of that. And I didn't love that environment and I quit within the year. And I just realized like, I really, really don't want to work for someone else. And I remember emailing my parents on like Hotmail, like that was how long it was, and asking them for their blessing. And to my surprise, because they always just wanted me to have a job, that would have been like a big success for them. And so they shockingly gave me the blessing because I think they didn't know what that meant. I think they were like, oh, she just wants to play around for a little bit and then she'll come back to a job. And it was with that I felt comfortable to quit my job. And that was when I decided to go ahead.
That resonates a lot. A lot of those elements resonate. So you're in your third startup, which is eWebinar. What does the company do?
eWebinar saves people from doing the same webinar over and over again. The thing is, people love webinars, but they're just not scalable. That's the biggest problem, right? Someone has to actually be there to run them live. So whether it's like your sales demos, your sales pitches, your onboarding, your training after somebody buys your product, you have to make sure that they stick around. And webinars is the best way to deliver that content. But most companies can't do them around the clock, right? Enough to actually serve all the new customers coming in. So what eWebinar does is we automate that process with a video. We turn any video into a recurring webinar that you can set on a schedule that just happens 24/7. So people can join right now, tomorrow, next week. They get the exact same experience. So we help companies scale all of that content.
Not being from the tech field, it's a pretty interesting. I mean, I understand the problem, but it sounds to me like a non-techie that this ought to have been solved a while ago. So, what gave you the idea and what convinced you that there was a real market opportunity here?
I think the best way to validate a market is that something already exists out there. I don't believe in being first mover or like blue ocean. I think when you want to do something that doesn't exist, I think that's a huge red flag. So, this particular problem that we're solving, I lived with in my previous startup for 5 years. I was the person that was delivering all these webinars. That's how I know this problem intimately. And I did try a lot of things that are out there, but everything that I tried was missing so many things that would actually make this process easy. But most importantly, those solutions were just not good. And I wanted to solve this problem by building the Apple of webinar automation. I don't want to have something that just like kind of works, right? I think the world where we can put a product out there that just barely works is over. If you just think about me and you as consumers, like we just demand so many things. So it was just years of trying things that were out there, but were just subpar. And that's, I think, the biggest validation is there are products out there that you know you can do better, but they still have a business. And I remember looking up these businesses and seeing where their employees were on LinkedIn and how big their team was. And most of these companies don't even have teams. Like they just probably outsource their whole team, actually, like what we're doing now. But that tells me that this is a business that I am passionate about. This is a business that other people are building off of and make a good living off of. And also it tells me that I can run this with a very small team, which is important because we're bootstrapped.
On that, do you have a preference that you would want to be flexible and agile and never want to be part of this large company where you're dealing with all the HR issues? Or is it just that you're bootstrapping and therefore it made the most sense to start lean to begin with?
I think both. Previous to eWebinar, I was in startups for 10 years. And what I know is I love making sales and creating products and freedom. What I absolutely hate is managing people, hiring and firing and recruiting. Like I hate all that stuff. And so coming into this business, I wanted no full-time employees. Everybody's a contractor, but also being able to hire anybody anywhere in the world is what makes our company possible because we're able to do it on a fraction of what it would cost in the US, Canada, or anywhere in Europe. So I think it's a bit of both. I always wanted to work through other people because then they can do the hiring and firing. And I want to just put that on them while I focus on what I love to do the most, which is building the business and creating revenue.
Makes perfect sense. So then coming back to the idea, you've had the struggles, you've seen other solutions, you know you can do it better. So now you had the kernel of something that might work. What happens next?
Wow, that's a huge question. I think the biggest step is to figure out that this is the idea you're going to jump in for. Every founder, every like entrepreneurial person would come up with an idea and buy a domain, right? That's why like people probably have like 100 domains that they never actually end up doing.
Ouch.
It's almost like you're not really a founder unless you have more than 20 domains, right? But the thing is like once you start digging into an idea, you start realizing, oh, I can't do this, right? Or someone else is doing it better than me and they have the expertise and I don't. So I think the biggest leap is to convince yourself that this is what you're going to spend the next 5 years on, minimum. This is not something I'm going to do because it makes financial sense, or I think there's a big market out there, but I don't have a background in it, or I don't have a network in it. I mean, that just makes it really hard. So coming to terms with committing yourself for the next 5 years, assuming you're not going to get paid, or if you are, you're going to get paid last and very little, that's the hardest jump. But then once you do that, then you start to put the pieces in place, right? What am I going to name this thing? How is it going to be branded? What is it going to look like? What other company do I want to emulate, right? Who's going to be my designer? Who's going to build it? Am I going to have a co-founder? Am I going to do this on my own? If I want a co-founder, who's going to be my co-founder? And how do I do this? Like, what kind of market research am I going to do to make sure that I'm on the right track? Are there any blind spots that I haven't seen? Who can I talk to that can tell me things I don't know about this idea? I think there's a lot of people that are like, oh, I have to keep my idea secret because it's so special. Or like I have to make it stealth. That's the worst idea ever. because you are one person. If you talk to 5 other people, maybe that person knows someone else who's tried this before and didn't work. And maybe you're not going to do it because it didn't work for that person. Or you realize, oh, actually, that person did something that I would do differently. So market research is also to figure out, like, are there any blind spots that I haven't seen? So further kind of validating that. And once you've done that, I mean, this is obviously a tech product, and that's what I can speak to. Then you have to spec out, what is your first set of features, right? Your version 1, the version that people are going to pay for the moment they see it. And that is becoming bigger and bigger because consumer expectations are at an all-time high. So once you come up with all those features, then you got to start building a team, right? And then you got to start thinking about, how do I pay that team if you're not the person that's coding it? And assuming that you've taken care of that, then you got to think about, how do I get it to market? Who are my first 10 customers? Don't worry about 50 or 100 or 1,000. Who are my first 10 customers that's going to give me their credit card, who are unrelated to me? It's not my mom, my uncle, my aunt, my friends. It's like someone that is unrelated to me that sees value in this product, that they're going to use it in their life or their business. How are you going to get there? And then as the team is building and creating, you as the non-technical founder or CEO will have to come up with all that stuff. Building a website, writing all the pages. If you're not a great content writer, who's going to write it? What are the first few articles that you're going to launch with on your blog so you don't look like a brand new company? And then writing all the help articles right before the product comes out so that you don't look like a brand new company. So it sounds big because it is a big task. But once you start doing it, it's just like a puzzle, right? It becomes very obvious. And there's lots of resources and communities, I think, that can give that guidance nowadays.
You've given us a lot to unpack, so let's go step by step. So first thing you said, which I really loved, is you said, there comes a point where you cross the chasm and you've checked all the boxes and you've assured yourself that this is something that's worth pursuing. How long did that process take you? And was there one thing that really convinced you? Or what was the point that made you say, I think there's a there here?
I want to say it was like 5 years because I honestly lived this problem and it was so painful. And in my previous startup, I was everything except for code. So selling to customers, onboarding, making sure they stay, feature releases, all of those I did myself. So sometimes I would do 7 or 8 of these like training, onboarding webinars that were exactly the same back to back. And I would go and find solutions to solve that. And I would tell friends that they need to build something like this so they could solve it for me and also other people. Because this is a big problem. It's not just something that I lived. But over the years, like nobody came up with something better. Periodically, I would look up webinar automation, evergreen webinar, like what would come up that's new. It just blows my mind that when I started this company in 2019, I started it 2 months after I sold my previous company. I just couldn't believe that so many billions of dollars were being poured into live broadcast, like Zoom, Instagram Live, Facebook Live, Restream, like you name it, they're out there. And this was like before 2020, right? And it just blew my mind that no one is solving the scaling problem of the live broadcast, right? If you're doing a webinar or some meeting or some thought leadership that works, that helps the customer stay or helps the customer understand you and generates revenue, why do it once a month? Wouldn't you want to do it 10 times a day? So I didn't understand that. And then companies started to have like automation features, right? Zoom has an on-demand feature, but it's literally a gated landing page with your replay on it. That's just a video on a landing page, and they call it a webinar because it's like a recording. So I remember one night I was just staying up Googling different solutions because I was so convinced that someone has solved this problem elegantly. And I just couldn't find anything. And then I asked myself, how would I feel if someone else did this before me, given how much I've thought about this and how much research I've done? How would that make me feel? And that was when I decided to do this. Like that was when I decided I was the person to do this. It's like what you said. It's like, well, doesn't it exist? It's like, sometimes it just doesn't. And you're gonna like, why? Maybe you're meant to be, right? But even then, like, I don't think it matters that someone else is doing it. Like, how many CRMs are out there? How many HubSpot replacements are out there? How many kinds of ketchup and mustard is on the shelf? As long as you know how to find your target audience and as long as you know how to differentiate and sell your value, the more the merrier. In fact, competition allows you to differentiate. Having competition helps you educate the market. I would say our biggest obstacle right now is we don't have that much competition. I want more automated webinars softwares to come out because then there would be 10 other people that would tell other people that they should automate their webinars and not do it live. And being one of the first people to actually educate people is actually super hard, right? Because people are like, well, if it's good, then why isn't everyone doing it? Yeah, I don't know. They're slow, right?
Your points are extremely well taken. And the other thing that you said was this value proposition and knowing what the market needs. You talked earlier about coming up with the basic, most critical set of features. How did you land on that critical minimum set of features?
Yeah, our minimum set of features is not very minimum to start with, and nobody's will be, right? Because as you do market research and you sign up for other people's software or you look at what other people are offering, you're going to be like, oh yeah, I need this, I need this. But building stuff takes a long time and it's also really expensive. And a lot of times you don't really know what to build and why it's built that way unless a customer interacts with it. You can copy a Facebook, absolutely. But if you don't know why something is there, your experience is going to be off, right? You can copy all the menus and the headers and the footers, but you don't really know why things interact with each other. So we came up with a set of features that was probably 50% too large. And we basically just got together as a team, probably once every 2 weeks in the beginning and maybe once a week closer to launch. And we just started cutting stuff. Like, do we really need this at launch? Who are we targeting? Who are the first people we're targeting and will they even use this? And do we really need that many interactions like polls and questions and resources? Or should we just start with 5? Or 4. We just kept cutting it. And in fact, we set a launch date because we just didn't want to keep spinning the wheel forever. Like, it's lovely to build something because when you never launch, you can't fail. And founders kind of get into that. It's like, oh, I'm just still building, or I'm like getting caught in administration, so I can't launch it. So we set a date and we're like, this is the day we're going to put it out there. And this is the day we're telling everyone that we're putting it out there. And the thing that we gave up was Stripe, was like subscriptions. We launched without an ability to charge people because we didn't need that from day one. What we needed was the ability to take credit cards. So we had a sign-in, like we had a sign-up form with Stripe integrated, but we didn't have any of our plans actually built in because for all of our first customers, we gave them a 60-day trial. So we had 60 days from the day we launched to figure out building the subscriptions. Because if we had done that, it would have taken like 2 or 3 more weeks just to figure it out. And so that was kind of how we worked backwards to be like, okay, do people actually need it? And sometimes the thing that you cut may seem really critical, but it's not time sensitive, right? You're still buying time to do that later on.
And a very creative solution to force greater adoption and better user feedback right up front. So I totally love it. The other thing you mentioned earlier was you said you need this list of 10 customers, right? Not 50, not 100, just the 10. Where'd you find your 10?
Luckily, I was in startups for 10 years before that and had other jobs. I mean, it was actually a super simple and tedious process. I basically started a Google Sheet and I just went through my phone and my old emails and all that stuff. And I wrote down every single person and company that I knew that maybe could use this in their business. So I used to do a lot of real estate conferences for my tech company. So all of the other real estate software companies, like my vendor buddies, and then every single real estate company that was my customer, because I knew they could use this. Like anyone that's using webinars to train or sell, they can use us. So I just made a list. I don't think that list was very long. I think it might have been like 150 or something. So I would have their name, company, email, phone number, if I could like text them. And I just went down the list and I just told them, hey, this is what I'm doing next. Does it sound interesting? If yes, let's get on a call. I would pitch them using screenshots. And I would say, hey, we're launching on this date. Would you like to give it a try? We're going to give you 60-day free trial, but we're going to charge you. If you want to keep this, it's not a beta, it's not an alpha, it's a product. So everybody went in knowing that they were going to be paying for this, but I went in already knowing they had this problem because I had experienced this and I was the person providing training for their agents. So that was how we got our first batch of customers. And I probably personally onboarded the first 70 customers before I automated the whole process. Because what you don't realize is you're building in a silo. Like you've come up with this stuff all on your own in your head. No one's actually seen it. And you make a lot of assumptions about where things should be, right? The menu, the button color, are they going to see this? Yeah, of course, it's super obvious. But you're looking at this for the last year and a half. Someone with fresh eyes who knows nothing about the software and what it does is going to see it for the first time. So what was really helpful was when they said, yes, I want to sign up. I booked an onboarding call with them. They knew we were a new company. We weren't hiding that. And I was going to get on a Zoom call with them. They were going to share their screen and I was going to watch them sign up, go through the entire process and create their first webinar. So by watching people interact with the sign up page, upload a video and create their first experience, like adding a schedule, adding a poll, like publishing it, we learned things from a design perspective that we needed to change. And some of the things were actually pretty mind-blowing. Like people would come into the product and skip all the tabs and just hit publish because they just didn't see it on the top. And it was just a simple color flip, right? It was like a colored button versus a white button. Just things like that. Or like how we name things. Like we thought we named things that were like pretty obvious, but to a brand new person, it's not. And it wasn't until that onboarding process became pretty smooth that now basically is just a hands-off onboarding process.
You mentioned also to them that it's going to be a paid product. How did you address the pricing issue before you had anything? Like, how did you even start?
It helps that I've always been in sales, so I'm not scared of asking people for money. I'm also not scared of people telling me they don't want to pay me. So I think that's a learned skill. You know, sometimes like people get like super hurt. They're like super emotional when someone says, I don't want to pay you. Like it's not you, right, that they don't want to pay. Like they just don't see value in this product. Or maybe your product doesn't create the value for them yet today, which is a big problem with tech because you can only build as fast as time allows. So we basically just picked a price point, did some pricing research. We didn't want to be the cheapest. We didn't want to be the most expensive because we couldn't, because we're new. And with the intention that we were going to increase the price later as the product grew, that was just the price. Like there was no question about it. Like we were pretty cheap, like $50 a month to start. And I would argue like anyone that can't pay that is not a great customer for us because they at least have to have a business that generates revenue and have people to sell to or like people to train.
Great. So you said it's a learned skill to learn to ask for money and not to get hurt when people say no. Are there like hacks for those of us who have not been in sales for what we can do to learn that?
Yeah, do it a lot.
I was hoping you're not going to say that.
You have to. As a founder, there's many parts of the business, but there's really two parts of the business, which is product and sales. Product is a cost. Sales is revenue. Like sales is an investment, right? It's what keeps the company going. So if you can't force yourself to learn the basics of selling, like I don't believe anyone's born a great salesperson. I don't believe that. I think sales is a science. I think anybody can learn it. And I think it's a very simple psychology of communicating to someone in a way that they understand. A lot of times, even in relationships, right, with your partners, with your friends, like what you're saying is not what's being heard. That's where the discrepancy comes in. And the best salespeople know how to align the two. So I already know that you need this product. You just don't know that yet. So how do I communicate that so you can also see that too? That's what sales is, right? It's not like, oh, I'm asking someone, I'm taking something from them, right? It's you're giving them something. And in return, they have to give you something too, right? To keep the product alive, to keep your company alive. So there really is no other way but just to do a lot of it. And a lot of people could start by shadowing other salespeople. There's a book that I recommend called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs. I've probably sold personally 100 copies of that book. But it's exactly that. It's just the art of presenting something where people understand what you're trying to say.
Great, spoken like a true pro. So I think lessons well taken. The other aspect of pricing is obviously there's a market demand side, and then there's the side that says, is it enough for you to make profits? At what point did you address the profitability or otherwise of the price point you had set? And how did you then work with that to ensure that you're making sufficient income or profits?
So that's a great question because we're not profitable. A lot of tech companies struggle to get to profitability, mainly because it's so expensive to hire a development team. If I had to hire a developer at 180,000 a year, I'd go under tomorrow, right? That's why people have to raise money, especially, in Western countries in the US and things like that. It's a hard question, right? Because if you want to build a SaaS company, it really takes 5 years. And we're in year 4, right? 2 of those years we were building, 2 of those years we've been live, and we're doing well, right? We started charging people from day 1 and they were willing to pay. A lot of people, like me in my previous company, took years before we found the first $10. And that's where a lot of your debt and starvation and all that stuff comes from, needing to borrow money and raise money and all that stuff. It's really hard, right? Because you as CEO gets paid last. You have to figure out, is this journey worth it? If I build this for 5 years or 10 years, what am I trying to get from it? Is all of that suffering worth my time? Because I would love to charge someone $1,000 a head for my product, but that's a different product. It's a different business. The higher you charge, the more service there is. And that's not the business that I want. That's the business that I had. The business that I had previously was we sold enterprise only. So our contract value was $10K a year to $100K a year. But with that came people texting me on the phone on weekends. I had to work the floors on conferences. And we had 50 different versions of the same product because everybody wanted to customize to their company. It's just a different business model. And that's not what I wanted to come in with. So I think less about price and profitability and more about what is the big picture of where we're trying to get to. Because the reason why a SaaS company can be sold for 10 times revenue, 20 times revenue is because of this process we're talking about. Because it's so hard. Most people die in that process. They just don't know how to figure it out or they can't survive long enough. So sadly, it's been 4 years. I haven't paid myself a single dollar, but I did sell my previous company. That gave me some cushion. It wasn't what you read about on TechCrunch. It was definitely life-changing, but it was not retirement level, which is why I had to start this one. So it gave me some cushion. But after 4 years, I'm now starting also to get antsy about not getting paid. There's all this life stuff, right? Inflation, traveling. You don't want to lower your standard of living. I've already done that, right? In my early 30s. That's a long way to say it's just really hard. And we're now at the point in our product where we are going to start raising our price. But that took a bit of time. It took 2 years to get to a point where we feel like we are now world-class software. We should be worth this instead of that. And I don't know what's going to happen because that's happening in the future. So we're going to actually do that tomorrow. And the real test is how will people react to the new pricing we have on our site. But I don't know. I just know that you can't keep selling a product at $50 and pay a team to focus on this 24/7 and build the best thing in the world. You can't price according to people's ability to pay. You have to price according to the value that you create and where you are on that spectrum. And we are the best. So these are kind of the things that go on in my head when I think about price. But one day, very soon, I also hope to get paid.
I will keep rooting for that. Which brings me to the question, obviously, we understand that there's a runway. We understand it's a long runway because it's a SaaS business. How do you then manage the financial viability of your business, right? Do you do projections? And if so, how comfortable were you doing that? How do you manage kind of the value part of the business rather than pure profitability?
Well, I think it's always pure profitability, honestly, because we have to be, right? I do my projections because I want to get to profit. And every dollar I invest in, I want to be able to put into my projections and figure out how that's going to affect my trajectory. One of the most valuable things that somebody taught me in the past is how to do projections. And I'm not a numbers person, I'm not an Excel person. So it's really hard. It takes a lot of energy for me to look at that and then figure it out. But 10 years ago, I was taught how to do this. I actually recently made a copy, like I turned my projections into a template that I'd shared with other founders because it was just so useful. But yeah, I do projections. I update them once a month at the end of every month, and it goes out for 1 to 2 years. And what it has are all of our revenue in the past and in the future, all of our costs as accurate as possible, right? Of course, we always refer to our accountants and our accounting documents for actual numbers, but it's as close as possible. And when I look at that, I'm able to see if I hire this person, or can I hire this person? If I hire this person, how much cost is that going to add? And how many more subscriptions am I going to need? So we have 3 different plans. So I'll be able to look at that and see what's our most popular plan. What happens if 50% of the people come in, but we raise our price by 100%? I think as a founder, it's really important, even if you're not a numbers person, to understand how these levers drive your business. Because all that matters is you have enough money in the bank to keep your business going. And when you're burning like $60,000, $70,000 a month, which for a startup of our size and with a product at our stage is actually not a lot. Like if we were in the US, we would be burning 3 times more. But it's still a lot of money, right? It's more money than you can borrow from your family. And it's just 1 month. So I have that in place. And now that we have some revenue, I work with CapChase, which is like a financing company that works with SaaS companies specifically to give them non-dilutive funding. So if you can get to that hump of creating some meaningful revenue, there are now lots of companies like CapChase that can give you a loan based on the revenue that you bring in every day. And then they have some algorithm to determine that. Myself, my co-founder, put in some capital in the beginning. And we also have investment from the very beginning. But like the main way that I manage cost and profitability is I'm just super frugal with who we bring onto our team. So I always pay people what they think they're worth. I never negotiate, but I'm very, very cautious of who we hire, what they do, how much they are, where we hire them, because our product is low priced. So we can't afford to bring on someone like $5,000 a month, $10,000 a month, right? That would be like another 100 subscriptions that we don't have today. So I think the most effective way of managing money in your startup is starting from like not spending a lot. Just don't spend a lot.
Coming back to hiring, you mentioned this a couple of times. What has been your strategy for resourcing for talent and for capabilities, given that you do have this small cost base and the need to keep everything variable and tight?
Yeah, it's a big challenge. I mean, since the entire world is outsourcing, like developers, all of these shops that we used to hire from don't give us allocation, right? Because now, like, every single company is outsourcing because they realize people like to work from home or they can work from home and it doesn't impact their revenue. So when everybody that used to hire locally is outsourcing, it's pushing the global price up by at least 25 to 50% minimum. But not only that, all of these companies would rather work for the mid-sized companies because they hire 5 people at once and then they keep adding people. Whereas someone like us can only add 1 person at a time if we can afford them. So we've already had 2 people fire us because we were too small and they wanted to focus on another company. So that's actually a really big challenge. And so we actually built a development team in Vietnam through a dev shop. We've worked with them for 4 years now, since day one. And my co-founder, who's also my life partner, David, he's the CTO. He still codes and he manages that team. But ideally, we can also hire people that are a bit more senior But we actually have not been able to do that because we're getting so close to profitability. So we can either hire another developer who is senior, or we can start paying me a little bit, right? So what is that choice going to be? Maybe we build a bit slower, but my own like mental well-being needs a little bit of uplifting as well, right? So these are the decisions that we have to make, but everyone else is fairly easy. Like if you're talking about like our marketing team, people that write content for different purposes, whether it's like blogs or long form pieces of content or designers, like all that other stuff is pretty easy because we only hire contractors. So we only hire people for a specific thing. And usually that person is doing that specific thing they're really good at for 10 other people. That's actually a better use of their time and talent. And it's a better use of our time and resource because we don't have to own this person that's actually really good at this one thing. And then they have the freedom to kind of work on their own time as well. So I would say the biggest challenge that we have is developers. And I'm not too sure how to solve that. I think there are companies that we used to pay 5,000 to 7,000 a month per person, like a senior person, is now charging double. So that's really tough.
See
And
that.
if anyone solved that, they should contact me.
What platforms have worked best for you outside of development? Would you care to name some that have been better than others to find these super skilled contractors with a narrow skill set?
Yeah, I actually just tap my own community now that I've been doing startups for so long. It's so easy to hire people now that it's hard to find really good quality for, I think, a lot of things, right? It's almost like jobs are like Tinder now, right? People are not committed to their jobs as much as they used to. I don't know if anyone else is like kind of feeling this, but there's this whole like quiet quitting movement. I'm like, what is quiet quitting? Why don't you just quit? It's like, oh no, we're going to show you. It's like, you know what? As a business owner, that's terrible. Also, why would you waste your time doing something like that? So I think the number of jobs that are available in the gig economy has made it exponentially harder to hire someone that's really good quality, that has integrity, and is self-motivated and all the things that you want. So I typically just go to my own community. I was part of On Deck, which is like a startup community a few years ago, and they have a built-in like Slack group that you can ask any question. I actually have a number of like role-based, industry-based Slack groups that I belong to that I ask questions in. But since I've started building content and posting content on LinkedIn, I actually think that's the biggest treasure trove of talent that you can find.
Awesome. That's a lot of helpful tips in there. So one other big topic we haven't really talked about too much in detail is funding, right? You talked about the fact that you'd made a sale of your own company. Clearly that provided a starting bounty, a bag of capital. You talked about bootstrapping. Can you just take a step back and tell us how you approached the whole fundraising issue from the get-go, how you made the decisions along the way, and what has helped you kind of zero in on revenue-based financing, which is what you're doing with CapChase?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. No one's ever asked me that before. So a company needs money to start, period, right? Whether it's your sweat equity or just money to pay other people. Like anyone who's done it with zero capital, maybe because they're a coder, is like, I'm envious of them. They're like my hero. But in the beginning, I put in 100,000. My co-founder put in 100,000 as well, which I get is like a lot of money for most people, but that's just the reality. And then I actually talked to a number of friends, and having had an exit really helps. I don't believe that success is repeatable. I don't believe that just because you had one, you can have another one because it's just so hard. There's so many different elements that can influence your success. But for some reason, other people think that if you've had a success, that you can have another one. So once I started telling my friends what I was doing next, and now that I'm getting close to 40 and a lot of my friends are older than me, they just kind of offered to invest in my next thing. But I actually thought about what I want my next company to be and how I want it. How do I want it to support the life that I want to live? I used to think oh, I just want to build this thing and sell it for 10 million. Do you know how hard that is? It's so hard that like 99% of people don't actually do it. So before I started eWebinar, before I even knew I wanted to start this particular idea, I just realized that I wanted a thing that could eventually pay me 20 grand a month, because that's like the number that I set myself on. And however I get there, like I don't care. I just want something that gives me that. And so I also wanted to build a company with friends. The idea that we could have a company together and we could do company retreats where it would be on the company account, but it would be like an investor retreat. And then all my friends would be there. That's the life that I want. So I actually structured this company such that all my friends and family investors have to be people that we are super good friends with. People that we've traveled with, spent holidays with, really, really close friends. Because otherwise, that retreat's going to be very weird, right? And so that was the number one requirement. And then I also structured the investment so that if we pay out dividends, because it's meant to be a profitable revenue-generating, revenue-first company, if we pay out dividends, the dividends would be paid out proportionate to your investment holding, not your equity holding, if that makes sense. So you can own 1%, but you could have 10% of the dividends payout, which is a non-traditional model, right?
For sure.
But the whole idea that you don't get paid back until the company sells, like that's crazy. What if I never sell the company? Because I don't want to sell the company. I want to build an ATM machine that helps fund the way that I live, right? I don't want to work forever. I don't want to pump this thing into some unicorn and then sell it. I don't have the ambition for that. There are so many other things that I enjoy in life that's not work related. So that's how it was structured. We put in some money. We got some friends and family. There was a minimum 50K buy-in. And it was structured so that they could, in theory, if we do well, they would get paid back their investment long before we actually sell. Because the idea is we would pay out dividends. The way that I've structured it makes this company not venture investable. So if I ever in the future raise venture capital, which I don't plan to, I would have to restructure the whole thing and get everybody to sign off. But they would actually hate that because that's not the vision that I sold them. And the vision that I sold them is exactly what I told you is, wouldn't it be amazing if we could build this thing that just gives us passive income and we could just spend time together? And these are all people that are like late 30s, early 40s, some in their 50s that have had some successes, but they're not founders. They're not going to go and start something. But as you get older, you start thinking, well, how much money do I actually need to retire? Turns out it's a lot. And it would help a little bit if you had something that gives you a little bit every month. So that was kind of the mentality behind that. So we were always revenue focused. And having that structure with all my friends makes it such that I'm even more revenue focused because number one, I don't want to let them down. Number two, if I bring in any new investor, I dilute them. And I don't want to do that. So that is making me think extra hard about whether I really need that money or not. Do I really want that person? And what would that mean to my friends and for me? So once we got to around 40K in MRR, that's when I started exploring non-dilutive funding just to have a line of credit because we were kind of running low on cash. And I wanted to see what options were out there. And also the market has been turning. You know, it's harder to get credit and things like that. So I wanted to lock something in before it was really hard to get lines of credit.
And so you just looked at RBF and figured out whoever gave you the best terms or gave you the best package that would work for your needs. Is that how it pretty much played out?
Yeah, I just looked at like 3 different companies. They're all different business models, right? So sometimes people would give you a small line of credit, but they would have like a very low interest. Sometimes they would give you a medium line of credit and have like, you know, an okay interest, higher than the bank, but at least you're getting it because the bank doesn't even talk to you unless you're profitable and in the tens of millions. Oh, then they're tripping over themselves to have your business. But until then, they're like, please don't talk to me. Or there are companies that give you massive lines of credit, but the interest rate is like a credit card. It's like 23%. I'm not saying one is better than the other, but one will be better than the other for your business. If I got a massive line of credit right now and I knew exactly where to put it, that would give me more than 25% return. Yeah, absolutely, I would do that. But otherwise, like, that's like putting 200 grand on a credit card.
So this has been pretty fascinating. So kind of moving a little bit more to qualitative types of issues, what have been some of the biggest external challenges you've faced through this journey with e-webinar?
I didn't know how hard it would be to get a self-serve SaaS product to market. I had mentioned that my previous business was an enterprise SaaS. Previous to that, like my first two companies I sold to enterprise. Previous to that, I was working for SAP. Previous to that, I was working for other companies selling to other businesses. So my background is enterprise sales, corporate sales, one-on-one sales, complex sales cycles, big ticket items. I have never sold a product that is fully self-serve. You come to the website, you put in your credit card, you start a trial, you maybe stay, maybe you don't. Sometimes you cancel, sometimes you upgrade, sometimes you downgrade. Like we all kind of know that MailChimp model. It turns out that when you want a hands-off business where nobody texts you on the weekend and evenings and you want that dream life, it's 10 times harder to get off the ground because it's no longer you picking up the phone and say, hey, do you want to buy this from me? It's how do you attract that person? Because for $50, like I'm not going to pick up the phone. Like I did that for my first 100 customers, but it's not sustainable, nor is it motivating. Nor can I hire someone else to do it. It just doesn't make sense. Nobody wants to get on the phone with me for that price. And so for the first time, I'm realizing why SaaS companies get the multiples they do. I had to come to terms with the fact that I actually didn't know what I was doing. I came to this business thinking, well, I already did two. So of course, I'm just going to do this one. I'm going to put the product out there. It's going to be awesome and people are going to sign up. It turns out they don't do that. So it was really disappointing. And then I had to just come to terms with, okay, well, if the way I've been trained to sell doesn't work for this particular business model, then how do people buy? And I've had to actually just earlier this year, like a year into the company, rethink my entire strategy, starting from zero again and learning the new form of sales, which is marketing and community building and content and audience building. Like the future of sales, I firmly believe, is community driven through social validation. I don't want you telling me I need to buy this. In fact, it turns out that lowers a buyer's chance of buying if you reach out to them. So it's now having a negative effect, not even a neutral effect, right? So people want to discover it on their own. They want to read about it in communities, on blogs. Even if you wrote that blog, this is the thing that blows my mind, is when we are recommending ourselves on our own blog, people feel better about that than if I tell them you should do this, right? It's like buying a TV. You probably like type in your chat group, like, hey, who's bought a TV before? Where should I go? How much did you pay? Like, it's the same thing. It's the same process, but it's happening in software more so than ever before. So that's like the absolute hardest lesson and obstacle that I'm still overcoming. I haven't fully solved it, but I guess that's also what keeps it interesting.
And on the inner side, there are certainly dark moments, self-doubt. Has there been anyone that stands out that pushed you to the limit and made you question the most basic tenets of your entrepreneurial ambition?
That person is always myself. I know it sounds so egotistical, but like I work really hard. Like I don't work a lot. I mean, my co-founder would not agree with that. I don't think I work a lot because I think I can work a lot more. But I work really hard. And a lot of people try to tell me that, oh, you shouldn't work so much. You should chill. You should take your weekends, which I do. I take them very seriously, but I still do something like every day. People are always trying to tell you to do less or like chill out a little bit more. But you know what? They don't pay my bills. Even my co-founder, like he doesn't look at the bank account. He doesn't know the login. He doesn't know how much money is in there. So I'm always the one that's like, okay, well, what is the next thing? What is the next creative thing that I can do that can get me the highest return? I don't believe that people need to work more. Just because you work more doesn't mean you're more productive, doesn't mean you will be more successful. I think we need to work less. But what we do need to do is work more creatively so that we can get more back for our efforts. And I'm the one that's constantly pushing myself to do that because I do like my weekends.
And what does it look like being creative? How does that play out in your world?
Yeah, I think that means, for example, being trained in one-on-one sales for over a decade, and you get that instant gratification of like getting someone on a phone and they're like, yeah, I'm going to try this. And then they sign up. You're like, oh, yay, right? But that's one person that may or may not continue with their subscription. But when I did 10 of those calls or when I sent out 200 emails a day, like I felt productive. But it was a one-shot thing. It wasn't scalable. And I had to do a lot of that to see any sort of return. So I had to take a step back and be like, I don't know how to communicate one-to-many right now, but how do I start doing that? The first thing that I did was I took a course by Justin Welsh. He's like a solopreneur, like just
I did too. I'm all about
Justin Welsh. He's just like an insane person. I love that guy. Like he's just so structured and like easy to understand. And going from like one-on-one sales related stuff that made me feel good about myself at the end of the day, but also bad because I wasn't getting the return, and switching to learning how to write content and feeling like I wasn't making progress because all that gratification is delayed, right? Creating an audience, writing content, understanding how to write content, all of that gratification is delayed. So that's an example of what I had to do. And then at some point, I was like, okay, it was just like an addict, right? I was like, okay, I'll just do like 50% of cold outreach and then 50% of my time I'll do this other thing. And then one day I'm like, okay, this is absolutely stupid. I don't think this cold outreach is actually working, at least for the product that I'm selling. I am prohibiting myself to do any more of that because it's just a waste of my time to fully creating content. So all I do right now is create content. All I do is get on podcasts. And you realize once you get into this wheel, like it kind of feeds itself. Right now, people are seeing you like in various different places. So it's been an interesting journey because it's new, and I didn't think I needed to do anything new coming to this business.
So knowing what you now know, what do you wish you knew starting out that you know now that would have made your journey better, faster, easier?
The biggest mistake that I made was I started this company thinking I didn't need a CTO. Like I didn't need a co-founder. I started my 2 previous businesses with the same co-founder. He was an amazing engineer. He was my best friend, but he wasn't a great CTO and he wasn't a great co-founder. And that was where a lot of the friction was. So I came into this company thinking, I'm just going to do the business side and I'm going to hire a dev shop to do all the product side and they can build stuff and I can go sell stuff. Turns out it's not that easy. So having a tech company without a CTO and a co-founder is like having a restaurant with no chef. But I realized that 1 year in. So I had already spent around $300,000 on outsourcing all this stuff with a product that couldn't get out to market. And David, I had mentioned, who is also my life partner, an investor in the company, started criticizing everything one day. He was actually, before he joined me as a co-founder, he was a fractional CTO for other startups. So then I was like, well, why don't you go fix it? Like, I don't know what to do. And so he started to go in and fix stuff. And then the product started working. And I'm like, I've been with you for 5 years and I didn't know that you could code this well. So why am I paying this other company? Why don't I just pay you? Or why don't we work on an arrangement and you can be my CTO? So I wish that I started this company from day one with a CTO, specifically with David as my CTO. Turns out like your co-founder is like next to you this whole time. And the other mistake that I made, the dev shop that I hired belonged to a friend. Our friendship is there, but it's not the same. And it's not something that I can change. But I've had now another 2, 3 more times, because I don't learn, of hiring friends that were not great for the role and not ending the relationship as early as I should. So those are the two big things is like, don't hire your friends if they're not right for the role, and start with a co-founder that might be beside you.
I'm just going to digress for 1 minute and then ask you one last question. The digression is you talked about getting investors who are your friends and that you could hang out together. What were your concerns, if any, if things went south? What that would do? I mean, nothing is a given in life, right?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Two things have happened in the past. So, because I chose this group of investors so carefully, like they're my people, I know them. And these are people that I can have really honest conversations with. Like, these are people that want to see me succeed because they've seen how hard I've had to work for my previous company. Like, it wasn't easy. Like, what I'm doing right now is fairly easy. What I was doing before, like, I was years in hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. I had one meal a day. Like, I would go to startups events for food. My parents didn't talk to me for 2 years. Like, that was like super extreme. So I have friends that are investors from those days, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm definitely putting money into this person. But two things happened. I did have an investor where we had another deal unrelated to eWebinar, and that one didn't work out in a way where I just didn't want any business relationship with him. And it was fairly easy for me to go to him and just say, you know what? I no longer want you in my life. And I need you to do me a favor and sell back your equity for the same price that you put in. And yeah, it was disappointing, but he did it without question because he also knows how crappy it is to have someone on your cap table that you just don't want there. Like, your investor is not just your investor. Your investor is a shareholder that has to sign every major document. It doesn't matter if they have 0.5% or 1% or 10%. They have to sign your document, including when you sell. So you better be super careful who is on your cap table because you have to convince them, and they can make your life super hard, right? Even if you had a drag-along clause, you can't just be like, oh yeah, we're going to sell this company. You have to take them to court, right? Depending on what country you are. And you have to have a judge say that, yes, this is a fair deal. You can exercise this drag-along. So it's not so easy. So that was one incident. The second incident was actually my previous co-founder was actually one of the first investors in this company. But our relationship over time has changed. And everyone that's involved in my company now is someone I have an active friendship with. Sometimes, like, someone's time in your life is just over and it's kind of the end of an era, and it felt like that. And it actually took me 2 years before having that conversation with him only a few months ago. Yeah, it took me like a lot of courage. He didn't do anything bad. It was just like, it didn't feel right for someone who wasn't contributing, for someone who isn't in my life, to have a piece of something that I work so hard for every day. And that's what I told him. And same thing, he understood, especially because he was my co-founder in the past. He wanted me to have a good time, and he just sold it back to me.
That's fantastic advice and good insight for anyone. So in conclusion, what advice would you give other founders maybe earlier in the journey than you are in terms of being successful, whatever that means for you in their entrepreneurial journey?
I mean, it's exactly that, right? It's figure out what being successful means for you, because we are so polluted by other people's idea of what success is. We read things in the media, on our apps, and TechCrunch. We talk to our friends, or we hear from a community that who and who has raised some money and hired this person, and they have a 100-person team and close a key customer. And then you feel like, I need to do that to be recognized, right? To be successful. Like, I want to be in the club. I don't think enough founders stop to ask themselves, what is it that you're doing this for, right? What's enough? What makes you happy, right? Is that a number or is that a lifestyle? And I've come to realize, thinking when I lived in New York, I thought I needed that unicorn exit. And then I realized, like, I actually don't have what it takes to drive a company there because I don't even want it. And it took a long time for me to have the courage to understand that, like, my idea of success does not need to be validated by anyone else for me to be successful. I can be successful in my own right. But you have to take a moment and ask yourself, how you define that and what you think is enough for you, and then work towards that and not someone else's idea of who you should be. In the end, it doesn't matter.
Awesome. This has been an incredible conversation, Melissa. I really am blown away. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, and I wish you all success. I'll be eagerly waiting to see where you take eWebinar and other future startups. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Melissa is an incredibly thoughtful, self-aware, and accomplished entrepreneur. And my conversation with her was packed with many insights. 3 stood out for me. First, I love the way she forced execution discipline on herself by committing to and publicly announcing a launch date. This takes guts, especially in software, where even one glitch can really set you back with customers. Melissa knew this and still forced the move on herself, which helped bring both clarity and actual progress to her product. Second, she had the humility and the objectivity to recognize when what she thought she knew, sales, would not only not work, but could actually be counterproductive to her startup's success. But the interesting thing here is not just that she learned something new, but what I found admirable was that she did it despite knowing that she'd have to let go of the most powerful motivator of instant gratification. That takes real discipline, and I admire her for it. Third, she developed a very thoughtful funding model that integrated control over her business, her vision for the business, and her long-term relationship that she wanted to have with her investors. Sure, she knew the risks, but she addressed the challenges even though it was hard for her to do. The lesson here is that as an entrepreneur, you're not bound by the available funding structures. Of course, it takes resources and creativity, but you can come up with models that are a better fit with your vision and your aspirations. The bonus for all of you tech and SaaS founders out there, she has a ton of nuggets in there that you can start using tomorrow. So, what one thing can you take away from Melissa's playbook to make your own? And how will it make your startup better? Thanks for listening to today's episode. We have show notes and more at achieve.co. That's achieve.co/podcast. Like what you heard? Hit subscribe and share with a friend. See you on the next episode. Now, go be an achiever.